once you've worked in sport, there's no going back.
And then lo and behold, before I left, I got offered too.
Hello and welcome to the Sports Grad Podcast, the ultimate guide to make it in the sports industry, where I chat with people in the industry and find out how they got hired into dream jobs in sport. If you want to know what people are doing to break in and grow their career, hit subscribe to the pod and subscribe to our newsletter for even more advice on how to start living the dream in the sports industry. Now, this episode is brought to you by Deakin University, home to the world's #1 sports science school. So if you're looking to get started on your journey in sport, explore their study options today. Now, if you're new to the show, my name is Ruben Williams. I am the founder of SportsGrad, and here we've helped people land 779 roles in the sports industry. And a quick shout out this week goes to Tia Schwalger, who has recently just landed a job as Partnerships Coordinator at Cricket Australia. You might have seen her name floating around a bit on LinkedIn and Instagram, where she has just replaced Dante McDonald. Now, that name will probably be familiar to a few regulars of the podcast because Dante has become the poster boy of SportsGrad, where he landed a job at Cricket Australia in just 16 days after joining the SportsGrad Method program at the start of the year, only to be bettered by Dan Raffin at the New South Wales Swifts, who got there in 14 days. But Dante has done such an excellent job in his role in the 8 months that he's been at Cricket Australia that he got a promotion. So Dante is moving onwards and upwards, which created an opening at Cricket Australia. And so Cricket Australia came back to me and said, hey, we need another Dante. And I said, well, I haven't got a Dante, but I've got a Tia. And so Tia has just started at Cricket Australia in the partnerships team. She's moved her life down from the Gold Coast down to Melbourne and is about to enjoy a bumper summer of cricket with the Ashes working at Cricket Australia. So well done to you, Tia. But if you like the sound of all that, you want to work in cricket or you want to work in sport or you just want the advantage that SportsGrad provides job hunters, because, you know, these jobs that Dante and Tia got, you're not going to find them on the job boards because Cricket Australia can't be bothered. So they come to us to find people quickly. So if you want that advantage and want to break into sport and put your career on a rapidly new trajectory like Dante is accelerating at, then head to our website and apply for the next cohort of the SportsGrad Method program, which, if you're listening to this episode in the week that it goes out, it closes this week. So get in quick, otherwise we have another one every 3 to 4 months. All right, on to our guest for today's episode. I want you to meet Australian cricket journalist, author and broadcaster Adam Collins. Adam is one of Australia's biggest cricket journalists, covering the game right around the world for the likes of SEN, The Guardian, Sky Cricket, BBC, Wisden, ESPNCricinfo, and much more. His podcast, The Final Word, which he co-hosts with Geoff Lemon, has been running for 10 years and has more than 1,500 episodes published and is often regarded by Wisden as the best cricket podcast in the world. However, Adam didn't take the traditional route into the sports journalism sphere. He actually pivoted after a very full-on early career working in politics, where he was based in Canberra working for the Prime Minister's office in a communications role. There is a lot to look out for. If you've already looked at the timestamps, you'll probably notice that I think it's our second longest episode ever, just because Adam is an incredibly interesting guy. So heaps to look out for, including Adam's early career in politics, how he transitioned into sport, starting the Final Word podcast. If you love a good startup story, you're going to enjoy that part. Buying the rights to the post-sandpaper tour of the UAE in 2018. Again, another incredible story of just hustle and making things come to life. And on that topic as well, how Adam bought the Batmobile from the 1991 AFL Grand Final, which led to a group of people campaigning for Andy Gowers to take over as president of the Hawthorn Football Club, which, if you want more on that story, go back a few episodes and listen to my interview with Andy not too long ago. Now, Adam also has got a book coming out called Bedtime Tales for Cricket Tragics, which we also discuss. So if you want to hear the inspiration for the book as well as what to expect, then look out for that part. But you can also get your hands on it in the UK on November 17 and in Australia on November 25. Grab a pen and enjoy this chat with Adam Collins. Hey guys, before we jump into the episode today, just a quick note to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Deakin University, home to the world's #1 sports science school. But whether you're into sports science, management, coaching, or business, Deakin gives you the chance to study what you love and turn it into a career. Adam, welcome to the SportsGrad podcast.
Great to be with you, Ruben. I've been looking forward to this since we first spoke about a month ago or thereabouts, and saw your bit with my mate Andy Gowers, and thought that'd be a nice chat. So looking forward to whatever comes here.
Yes, well, I always love sharing with listeners how I get connected with podcast guests, and this one did come off the back with that chat with president of the Hawthorn Football Club, Andy Gowers, which you saw and reached out and opened my eyes to a whole nother backstory that went into Andy's presidency as well, which led to an awesome chat, and now has led to this podcast too, which after we dived in, you've got your own incredible story with what you've built with The Final Word and your own journalism career. So yeah, really keen to dive into it.
Good as gold. Let's do it.
Awesome. Well, for those who don't know you, you've been podcasting for the last 10 years, 1,500 episodes. Wisden regularly describes you guys as the best cricket podcast in the world. And then if you go through your LinkedIn, you've worked with just about every single publication around the world as well. And now you are basically tying that in with being an entrepreneur on top of that too. But one of the things that kind of really impressed me the most was the fact that you are still playing cricket, because I recently had a chat with a mentor of mine who he's probably in his 40s, and we're talking about business things, and I asked him, like, what would you do if you were 31 again and ready to kind of expand your business in any way, shape or form? And he goes, Ruben, if I was 31 again, I'd probably go back to playing sport. And so, but you are still doing that. So tell me a bit about, why that's still important to you. What keeps you going?
It's perceptive from your mentor. So what happened with me was I loved cricket growing up, and classic quintessential Australian Melbourne childhood where I was playing footy in the backyard with my brother or in the street with my friends until we were called in during the winter, and the same applied during the summer, just playing cricket until dusk or beyond, and then of course playing for my local club in Endeavour Hills in the southeast suburbs of Melbourne through until senior cricket, and and on it goes from there, and played overseas and that type of thing when touring and backpacking in England, and all these great stories that come from being a recreational cricketer. And then I reckon it must have been about 10 years ago, I did my shoulder a number of times. I was having cortisone injections to play. It was a complete shambles. At the time I was bowling seam up still and trying to charge in and give it my best. And I had a couple of episodes where the ligaments basically snaps, and I sought rehabilitation, as you do. And over time, the message coming through was it's going to be a long time before you can do that again, if at all. So I threw the toys out the pram, didn't play at all, short of the occasional kind of like media game over here in the UK, where by that stage I was based. And I would sort of stand at mid-on or second slip and bat at 9 and hate my life whenever I played, and really didn't take it seriously at all. And then it was around the time, well, not around the time, it was the pandemic. Over here in London, there was a period of time where we could have 6 people outside to exercise together. That was one of the stages back to, I guess, some version of normal life here. And what I was doing with, it was 5 colleagues at a time, but it ended up being a couple of nets worth. And before you knew it grew momentum, was netting. And that was our social activity on a Wednesday night. We would go out, have a net, and have a socially distanced beer, to use a bit of jargon from the time. And something just a switch was flicked in my brain. I'm like, why did I ever stop playing? By that stage, I would have been 35. I just had my first child, and I thought, I want to play cricket again. But instead of charging in, I realised I'd have to change my game, and started bowling a few off breaks, and then became vaguely obsessed with it. Then became thoroughly obsessed with the craft of off spin. And 5 or 6 years on from that, I'm playing an embarrassing amount of cricket in Australia and in other parts of the world, and probably playing better cricket than I've ever played as well, as far as what I'm able to do with the ball, and enjoy success doing that, and playing with some incredible people over here and on tours and various other things. Lucky to play for MCC over here for Marylebone Cricket Club as well, where I've been a playing candidate the last couple of years, which is the way you become a playing member ultimately at MCC. That's part of the story. My Sunday team's part of the story, playing for cricket media teams and all of that. And played all up 50 games this season in the UK. So bowled in 49 of them, played in 50 games, including on the test pitch at Grenada the day after that match finished with Australia and the Windies. I talked them into giving us the pitch the next day. My colleague Bharat Sundaresan and I put the pressure on Cricket West Indies. They gave us the pitch. So that was a nice focal point of the season in totality, getting to play on a test ground, and I can't wait till the next season starts now. So even though I'm 41 and I should be thinking about giving it away, I'm the opposite. I'm like, I want to play till I'm, as old as I am, healthy enough to play.
That is an incredible amount of cricket. I'm glad to hear that you're back in the game and loving it. Sounds like you're playing a game of cricket every 2.5 days or something like that. And,
Felt that way. My wife certainly issued that. But a lot of it over here, the difference, if you're an Australian listening to this, you might think, how can you play 50 times a season? Very, very different culture over here. Midweek cricket's a huge thing. So a lot of my cricket was Monday to Thursday and Sundays. League cricket Saturday, but whereas in Australia, there really only is Saturday cricket with a sprinkling of other bits and bobs. Over here, in the middle of summer, you could find a game any day of the week. And I tended to on the days I wasn't, otherwise working.
And it would be remiss of me not to mention the fact that you've passed 100 wickets for the season, which is an incredible achievement. So I'm guessing that up there with everything else you've done in your journalism career.
Oh, yeah, if only. No, I am very aware that what it constitutes. But yeah, I suppose it's a volume thing, isn't it? I bowled in 49 games, so did over 2 wickets a game, got me to over 100 on the last day of the season. We were into autumn by that point, but the season was still live for one of our teams. And that was a nice thing to do. And I set that goal at the start of the season. Originally, I was going to write a book about it, not really about it, but about something else. And I got sidetracked and the book didn't happen. But it was nice to, do something that I'll probably never be able to do again.
Amazing. Well, I'm imagining scenes in London of people storming the pitch and, getting around you, Buddy Franklin type areas at the SAG.
That's our generation gap, Ruben. I was at every one of Jason Dunstall's 100th goal bring-ups as a youngster from Princess Park in 1988 through to MCG in 1996. I was at all of them. So that shows where we got our generation gap, where you watched Buddy against Carlton in 2008 and I saw all the Dunstall ones.
Exactly right. Awesome, mate. Well, we start a lot of these episodes with some quick fire questions just to get to know our guests a little bit better. So I've got a few for you before we dive into a bit more about your career. And the first one for you is, what was your first ever job?
My first ever job. Okay, it was I was a pie boy at VFL Park. Hot pies, cold drinks, chocolate bars with the pie tray. So I was in year 7, and I lived quite close to Waverley. We grew up in Dandenong and Endeavour Hills. So by that point, we were in Endeavour Hills, and VFL Park was probably 5 minutes away from where I went to school in North Dandenong. And would get paid, I think it was a 10% commission on everything you sold. And they would deduct what you were short at the end from your pay. So you might sell the equivalent of, say, $30 or $40 worth of commission, which was a great day out when you're 12 or 13. But if you were $20 short, you get the minimum wage of $10. And you go away having slaved away for 7 hours for $10, which was probably vaguely illegal. But you didn't ask questions. I did it in the 97 and 98 seasons. But towards the end of 98, I was getting itchy feet. I wasn't working too hard. It was Dunstall's last season. I wasn't working too hard when he was playing before he got injured in round 12, I think it was. And then I realised that I wanted to stop going to the football to work and wanted to watch the Hawks play. So in 99, I stopped doing that and kept doing it at the tennis and at Moomba and at the Australian Open each year. But yeah, classic pie boy was the first time I ever received any money for working.
Sounds like that's where your thought began on how can you watch sport and actually work at the same time as well.
Maybe. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but maybe there was the seed planted then. My second job when I was, that I don't know if it's still a thing, Ruben, you would know. Is it 14 and 9 months when you can get your first job or something legally?
I was 14 and 9 months to the day when I started at Bread Street Bakery in Mont Albert, so yep.
Beautiful. Well, for me, when I turned 14 and 9 months, I started umpiring indoor cricket at the Dandenong Indoor Cricket Centre, which was great when it was doing my mates and doing juniors. A bit tougher when, probably in my second year of doing it, I remember I was umpiring Division 1s on a Wednesday night and I would dread it. I would dread the whole week before Wednesday, knowing that the abuse and pressure that was coming my way as a 15-year-old. I remember there was a team called Booney and they were brutal. They were absolutely brutal the way they would treat me. And there was a team called... Actually, I won't repeat the name of the other team. It was very of its time. You wouldn't get away with it now. But So again, early inroads peripherally into working in some way in sport, in cricket, indeed.
I'm sure life for umpires back then would have been even more rough. But my next question for you is, what did you study at university?
I did arts, briefly arts law, but arts primarily. I did an unusual thing where my last year of high school was as an exchange student. Most high school exchange students go in their penultimate year of school. I, for whatever reason, went in my final year, studied in upstate New York. So Buffalo, New York is the most useful reference point there, about 15 miles from Buffalo. And when I got back from there, I'd done all the standardized testing in the States, like the SATs you've probably heard of. I did well in school over there and got I did well with my grade point average and whatnot, and that was sufficient for Monash University to allow me to go in as a BA student without having done my VCE, sorry. That was the springboard in. Was briefly a law student, but I was too busy, way too busy running around campus doing other things, political things at the time, and lost the thread of the law pretty quickly. And took me a while to finish the BA. I loved it. I really enjoyed studying at uni, and wish I had have gone on and done a master's, really, in hindsight. But maybe I will one day in my dotage.
Mm. And a tough one for someone who's seen a lot of sport. But what is your favourite sporting moment?
My favourite sporting moment. Look, professionally, the best thing I've had the privilege of commentating on would probably be the 2019 Men's World Cup final with the Super over at Lords. The place was absolutely heaving. Back on SEN, what we were doing was we were taking updates from Wimbledon. You might remember the Wimbledon final went to 9-7 in the fifth. There was a crazy finish at Silverstone that day as well in the F1. But we were the primary call, and I remember at one stage throwing to. I said something like, over to SW17, you've got 10 seconds straight back. They're like, it's fifth set, it's break a serve, whatever. I'm like, right, back to us. We can't miss a ball here. But that was absolutely wild to have that experience. But I've been extremely fortunate to have done lots of test cricket around the world. The Edgbaston test that Australia won at 7:30 on night 5 in 2023 with Cummins and Lyon at the end doing the last half an hour of that. And being on there to rate those moments was pretty cool, as was the next test, the Bairstow Carey stumping moment, which got seen by millions and millions of people, because these days everything you say on commentary, there's a camera in the box, so everything gets turned around for socials, and most of the time that's okay. Sometimes it can get a bit embarrassing, but that was a bit of commentary I was proud of as well. So there are lots of bits to draw from, but they're the professional ones. Personally, 2008 Grand Final, going along with my best friends and watching Hawthorn win. My friends, my chosen family, the guys I go to the footy with or had gone to the footy with through that period of my life, and love them all very dearly. One of them passed away last year, and I think a lot of us spoke a lot about those grand finals that we were so privileged to watch together in 08, 13, 14, 15. No one can take away those days. I mean, you, as a sports fan, there's highs and lows, and you can't control it. You've got to surrender to what's going on out in the field. But when it breaks your way and your team wins the flag, it really doesn't. Nothing comes close to that for me as someone who's born and raised in Melbourne and has the Hawthorn Football Club, pulsing through the veins, so to speak.
Yep. We've got a lot of crossover in favourite moments, and I was fortunate to be in London during the 2023 Ashes and made it to the Lord's Test, but was watching that Edgbaston game on local time, glued to the TV. So we might have to compare notes off air another time. Last one for you is, if you had 30 minutes to pick the brain of anyone in the world, who would it be?
Oh, gosh, question without notice. That's a tricky one. My instinct goes to sort of political leaders and those who are making the overarching decisions. That probably goes back to my, my former life, which is probably a bit boring, isn't it? Like picking out some random politician. But that might be where I land in the short term. I think that just for sheer curiosity at the moment, living over here in the UK and seeing the way the Starmer government is performing or not performing, as it were, in many respects, I'd love to know what's going through the mind of Keir Starmer. Because it does strike me as though strategically, or at least tactically, there is something's going on with him which is not connecting with anybody else, and I'd love to know why that is. Maybe there is no strategy associated with it, and they're stumbling from minute to minute. I know what that's like. I've been in a government where, when we went off the rails at a certain point in time, it did feel like we were sort of reaching from crisis to crisis, and it can get a bit overwhelming. But they're only 1 year into a 5-year term, so that's a curiosity to me. But yeah, that's rather vanilla, isn't it? Citing the Prime Minister.
There's no wrong answers to that question.
Probably goes to my wider interest. There are on the spot. I'm just going to leave it there, because otherwise I might start spouting names that are even more boring.
No, that's a great answer. I think one of the things I love about chatting with people in the sports industry is understanding how multifaceted they are, and it's not just all about sport, but there are other different spheres of their life that are interesting to them too. So which leads me to, I guess, the start of your career, which I'm really keen to dive into, which kind of add context to how you jumped into sport. But you mentioned your days at Monash that led to a career in politics, working in the PM's office. Can you tell us about the start of your career and how that transpired?
Yeah, sure. Look, I was, like those on campus, those people who are like heavily involved in like the Labour Club and whatnot. You'd know those people, like we were them. Me and my mates were them. We got involved in first year. My girlfriend at the time was heavily involved. It became all consuming, unhealthily so, as you realise when you're older. But also the friendships you make in those formative years at uni in your late teens, early 20s tend to last the test of time, I reckon, the close ones anyway. I was working for a member of parliament when I was like 19, and from there it followed a fairly familiar trajectory in the early years. I was very involved in Young Labor. I was very involved in the Victorian Labor Party more generally, in the factional hustle and bustle, finding my feet, learning my way as I went. And then in 2007, I was 23, and there was the Kevin 07 federal election. And just before the election started, they were looking for a couple of younger staff members to go and join the leader's office, who would be basically the 2:00 in the morning guys. So they wanted people with a strong interest in media to be responsible for digesting back when newspapers were a thing, digesting the hard copies of the newspapers as they were, virtually coming off the printing press, off the trucks. And I was put forward to be the Victorian candidate for that. There was a New South Wales candidate as well, and we both went into the two separate head offices that were running in that 07 campaign. And that was an eye-opening experience, going from working in sort of state politics to working in a federal campaign where it was 24 hours, 24/7 stuff really. And at the back of that, the Labor opposition won. Kevin Rudd was the Prime Minister. The government was being formed, and there were suddenly jobs everywhere. And I was offered a job to work in the inaugural PM's press office in that government. Took that moved to Canberra like the next day. What an opportunity as a 23-year-old, and got the chance to sort of lap Australia and lap the world with the PM for 2.5 years, I think it turned out to be.
Wow.
Which was an extraordinary experience in hindsight. And then about 2.5 years in, I moved next door. I got promoted. I had a couple of different jobs in there. I was working on strategy and question time and politics for the second year with Rudd, and that meant I was on the tactics committee every morning, which is this really unusual sort of Byzantine group of people who get allocated from different offices to decide on question time strategy each day. Albo chaired it as he was then leader of the House and a cabinet minister, so he would chair tactics every morning in the cabinet ante room there, and I was kind of one of the reps from the PMO, and would be involved in the strategy side of things. Gillard was quite important in that, Swanee as well, and then Wayne Swan, who became my boss, mentor, dear friend. As close to him as I have been to anyone in politics, and spoke at our wedding a couple of years ago. He offered me a job to be one of his press secretaries, and went over there in early 2010 when I was 25, with a view to probably going back to the PM's office at some point. Had things remained stable. Of course, they remained anything other than stable, or they became a complete shambles for a few years there, with a lot of chopping and changing of leaders and that type of thing. And I stayed the course with Wayne and had a really nourishing experience working for someone I have such an enormous amount of respect for, who I can't tell you how hard that guy worked. He squeezed the sponge of life, of public life, like no one's ever squeezed it. He got everything out of himself, everything out of us, to a fault. Like, we worked too hard. There was no work-life balance, and that led towards, I suppose you can't keep all the balls in the air in your personal life, phrase, and whatever else. But at the time, it felt like it was worth it. But it did also mean that I was knackered. I took a sabbatical and lived in the UK for a year and worked in sport, which we'll probably come to. And at the 2013 election, when we lost, I was Deputy Communications Director on the national campaign in 2013, which is where I went after Wayne finished up as Treasurer, when Rudd came back as PM. And I realised that was time and needed to work out what was going to happen next. I had a bit of an idea, but things moved pretty quickly from 2013 and beyond into journalism.
Well, what an incredible formative experience for any young career. And I'm guessing you've still got Kevin Rudd's phone number. Have you texted him after his altercation with Trump in the US the other day?
No, I don't have an ongoing dialogue with Kevin Rudd, to be honest with you, because I was, and this is of its time. It would, I feel stupid even saying it, but I was seen as a member of the Gillard camp because I worked for Wayne Swan. So therefore, any never the paths crossed really in that weird time when that rivalry existed. Briefly, Kevin lived in my building in Canberra when he was foreign minister. And we ran into each other a couple of times in the lift, and I spoke to him a couple of times in the 13 campaign. But honestly, I've had nothing to do with him. But I very occasionally see Gillard around the traps. She's based in London, so I see her at an event or something like that, and see a lot of Wayne Swan. I saw him a couple of weeks ago, and remain extremely proud of the work that he does. He's finishing up as the national president of the Labor Party soon. He's 71 now, so he's had a really long career in public life. He first went into the parliament in 1993, finished up in the parliament in 2019, and he's continued serving the party in this role as national president since 2018. So he's well and truly earned his retirement from professional politics, and that's the person I stay in touch with most out of that world. And a whole bunch of my mates who are now in the cabinet, right? Because we were 20s and 30 somethings, and a lot of them have now gone on. I mean, my chief of staff was Jim Chalmers, who's the federal treasurer. Claire O'Neill was the first person who was involved in recruiting me to Young Labor. She's in the federal cabinet. There are a range of them. Tim Watts, who I've spent a lot of time with over the years through Young Labor and beyond. He does an outstanding job as the member for Gellibrand, and he's been a minister as well. So there are a whole bunch of people who are about my age or a little bit older who are now actually doing it. And I watch closely. Annika Wells, who was sports minister until recently, now communications minister. We came through together. We were colleagues together, great mates as well. So I interview her once a year on the SEN test coverage, which is pretty funny given we've had like a million nights out till 4 a.m. And now she's a grown up big time. And I suppose I am to an extent. So yeah, that's more who I remain close with.
Amazing. So you've had this, young passion in politics, which you've been able to turn into a dream job in that sphere. It sounds like it was incredibly intense. You got what you needed out of it, but then eventually felt like, all right, time for something new. And that's where sports entered. How did your career transition after that?
Well, there was the year I did in London working on the Olympic Games. And look, to be honest with you, Ruben, I didn't covet going into sport necessarily. I'm just an Olympophile. Love the Olympic Games, always do. Like, even now, I wouldn't say, like, if I'm watching sport on the TV or I'm not emotionally invested in Australia winning the cricket or anything. It's not my job to care whether Australia wins the cricket. It's my job to talk about it or write about it and do so dispassionately. There are individuals I'm invested in the story of. I don't want to pretend that you don't get attached to certain players who you become friendly with. But generally speaking, I feel at a distance from that. But put the Olympic Games on. My eldest is 5.5 now. Last year at the Games in Paris, like I was there, watching the Australian swimmers win and, sobbing and watching the national anthem as proud as anybody. So something about the Olympics just does something to my brain. The chance came to apply for a job for LOCOG with my then girlfriend, who I was living in the UK with, and we both got jobs, and they were amazing jobs. They weren't especially high stress jobs, but we had lots of staff, and it was incredibly well resourced. And I think we worked there for 9 months together or something like that. Of the 12, I'd taken a sabbatical away from politics because I was pretty knackered and needed some time away. I wanted to scratch the itch of being in England again, having been here playing a lot of cricket in 2005. I wanted to get out here and play again as well. So that was the 2012 summer, playing for a terrific club called Hampstead in the Middlesex comp. So that was part of the motivation for being here. When I was dismounting from politics in 2013, I had been writing about sport. In the last year of Wayne being Deputy Prime Minister and Treasurer, I remember speaking to him in the December of 2012 saying, I think you should do some different things in 2013. I think you should write some things, have some things written for you, which are a bit outside of the normal sphere of politics. Nothing outrageous, but just stuff that you might want to say on the assumption that we're probably going to lose the election. So that led towards an essay that I wrote for him or with him, but, as a speechwriter for him, which was about 80 years on from Bodyline, the 80th anniversary of that in January 2013. And I linked it to Australian republicanism and trying to renew a call for that debate to be kickstarted again, and knowing that with the megaphone of the Deputy Prime Minister, that would generate plenty of headlines. I'm really proud of that piece of writing. It went around the traps. It ended up in the on the front page of the Age and the Herald that day with Wayne Swan renews call for a republic and a piece that was ostensibly about cricket. So that planted the seed that I thought, well, maybe when this is over, maybe I could look at writing about cricket for a living. But I didn't consider it too much more until a series of events, which we might go on to. One thing led to another, as it tends to do in life.
Yep, that's incredible. Well, I totally can share your thoughts on the Olympics last year, or in general as well. I was lucky enough to make it to Paris as well, and it was my first time at an Olympics since I was 6 years old, living in Sydney for 2000, which is a vague memory now. But being in Paris, to your point, I remember watching Jess Fox win a gold medal. It was her second gold medal, and you see the flag go up, you sing a song, you're like, this hits different. So
it does. I mean, whenever I see Jess Fox do anything on social media, I was advocating last year on Twitter. Yeah, I'm still on Twitter. I'm sorry about that. But I can't help it. As Pete Lawler often says, he likes a shit pub. I feel the same way. I thought she should have been named Australian of the Decade. Forget Australian of the Year. Jess Fox, what an Australian she is.
Yep.
I know she's on the comeback trail right now and wasn't involved in the Worlds last week, but that stuff. I was there in 2008 with Rudd as his sports advisor. One of the things I did for Rudd, in fact, in some ways that's linked to all of this, right? One of the things I did with Rudd was work as, in addition to media, strategy, politics, opposition research, and that kind of stuff, I also did sport on the side. So there were a whole bunch of really interesting relationships I developed in industry. And that did also make me think that, maybe afterwards there might be something there for me. But that included the fortune of being at the Beijing Olympics with him. And then I was working on 2012 and saw some extraordinary things, including being in the photographer's pit on the finish line when Usain Bolt won the 100-meter final.
Wow.
So, that stuff that's priceless memories.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was 19 or 20 or something like that, I wrote a little, wasn't like a kick the bucket list, or bucket list. We called it a life list, just a bit more sort of positive. Go to the 100-meter men's finals on that list. And so it's been on there for 10 years. And last year I thought I'm finally going to tick this off. Got onto the Paris 2024 resale website, found a couple of tickets that, weren't absolutely exorbitant. And was like, this is going to happen. Anyway, like a couple of days before the event, I checked them again and I realized why they were so cheap. And that was because they were wheelchair access tickets. And I was like, oh God, what have I done here? So that kind of put me in the position where I was like, what do I do with these tickets? Anyway, ran the gauntlet. I got in and we got to see the Paris 100-meter men's final. So we got to tick that off.
God loves a blagger.
Yeah.
If I've learned anything along the way about getting into things and blagging into things, in 2009 at Lord's, the Queen, I was there on, probably summing up the difference in where I was as a 20-year-old compared to a 24-year-old. When I was 20, my equivalent of a life list, let's call it, might have been going to Lord's Day 1 of a test series, right? And I was there in 2005, as I mentioned, playing cricket, traveling around, not just doing England stuff, like I went around Europe and, well-worn path, right? From Eurovision to Lord's. Which was in Kiev that year, which now seems remarkable that I'd spent a week in Kiev in 2005, considering what's happened.
Was that Lorraine? Did she win that year?
No, Lorraine won in 2012, the greatest Eurovision winner ever. Lorraine, you got to. I won a lot of money that night. 2005. It was me going as a backpacker, paid a scalper 350 quid, so 7 times the asking price on the ticket to get in. There's a photo that does the rounds of me, which has been published in The Guardian and other places these days, of me wearing a Hawthorn jumper with long hair. There on the balcony of the Compton stand. 4 years on from that, because I was working for Rudd in the sport capacity, among other things, CA gave me tickets with them for the first couple of days. And on the second day of that, there with a buddy of mine, a colleague of mine, Tommy, who was working for Gordon Brown at the time. And we were dressed nicely, nicely enough. Probably had a tie on, certainly had a coat on. A jacket on, and the Queen was coming to meet the Aussie team and the English team at lunch day 2, which is custom, or was custom. And I said to Tommy, I go, if we're ever going to sneak into the members at Lord's, it's going to be when the Queen is doing her thing, because all the stewards will want to go up and watch. And I couldn't have played it any better. Walked in there like I was meant to be there. We sat in the Warner stand, which is adjacent to the pavilion, but you have to be a member of MCC to sit in there during a test match. And we spent the whole day in there and ended up picking up 2 tickets to a dining room in the gents that were left there after lunch. Went and sat. Wine, all that jazz, all thrown in, and watched Andrew Flintoff tear through Australia in the final session before the rain came. As I said, God loves a blagger. You just got to sometimes have a crack, and it's very rare that someone will pull you up when you give the impression that you're meant to be somewhere. And if you get that right, it can take you a long way in life, more widely, probably.
100%. That is a great story. I think watching the cricket in Lords from the pavilion's a bucket list item for just about any cricket fan. I had one meeting with the ECB, which prompted a self-guided tour of the place. But I will hopefully get there on a day's cricket one day.
I'll take you, provided I'm up for membership in a few weeks. Provided that I'm over the line. Next time you're in London, I'll take you along.
I'd love that. I'll hold you to that. Let's get back to your career journey. When did the final word come into the picture?
Right. So, to pick it up in 2013, where I kind of thought maybe possibly this cricket thing, I don't know. I was applying for jobs in the real world and it just didn't feel right. It just didn't feel right. I came runner-up in two jobs that in theory would have been dream jobs. One was in some respects I've actually blocked out what the jobs were, maybe because I've moved so far beyond this now in resumes and the graft, and I know a lot of your listeners will be in this space in life, so I don't want to talk down this process because it is an important one. And I often provide career advice to young people about how they might bash the door down. But I went for a job. It might have been Director of Comms at Hawthorn Football Club. It might have been called Director of Communications and Marketing, something like that. Came runner-up for that. And the same job came up at Cricket Australia, and I made the final round of that as well. I did an interview at 4 o'clock in the morning because the 2013 Ashes were on. I was at Parliament House interviewing for this CA job that went the way of a far more experienced person, and I'm glad that person got the job. I didn't get that job either, which is in some ways great because it meant that I had to start thinking more widely. Well, if I'm not going to get these jobs that would be dream jobs, what else is there? I was talking to banks and corporate jobs, and I realized that I would just go into the same treadmill that I had in politics, working, I don't know, upwards of 12, 13, 14 hours, if not more, a day, living in your suit for 6.5 days a week. And I'd just be doing it for a bank instead of the government. And I'm like, I don't know, it just didn't feel right. The whole thing felt awkward to me when I was on essentially gardening leave after that 13 election. And then one night, perhaps inspired by having written that thing for Wayne earlier in the year, I just had an idea, and I just started writing it into my laptop late at night. And I just kind of wrote what was tantamount to an opinion piece advocating for George Bailey to be included in the Ashes squad for the 2013-14 series. And I had this, 1,000-word argument that I'd written, couldn't have been that good. I haven't read it in years. I'm sure I'd be embarrassed reading it back now. But I was well enough connected in media circles from my previous job that I kind of hawked it about. And there were a couple of different media publications who were happy to run it. One of them was ABC. They ran it, and then Bailey made 100 that night playing for Australia in a one-dayer in India. And it was just the perfect article to go on from their perspective. It must have been 6 a.m. Australia are waking up to George Bailey having made 100. And here is an article explaining why he should be in the test team. It took off. It did really well. They offered me an article a week. They said, you can write an article a week for us through the 13-14 Ashes. And that's when my head was turned. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'll do that. And I really tried really hard for that summer to do a really good job on these columns. Again, they were probably rubbish, but it was more that I had the ability to tell the world that I was a writer, a columnist, I was writing Wayne Swan's book at the same time. That was my other job that I was doing on the side. I was writing with him his time as Federal Treasurer and the story of the global financial crisis in 2008. So I was already in the groove of writing. And then Geoff and I met in that summer in 13-14. I'd seen what he'd been doing, what he'd been writing. I'd followed his progress a little bit. I was peripherally aware of the fact that he'd done some alternative cricket commentary on what was then the Raw. And I'd had a similar idea when living in London in 2012. There was an amazing pop-up radio station called Test Match Sofa, which was a renegade guerrilla pirate radio station, which my dear friend Daniel Norcross started in his living room using the proceeds of a bereavement in the family and a payout from his previous job. He invested basically all of it in running a guerrilla radio station, and it turned into an absolute behemoth by about 2012, 2013, when it had been in operation for 3 or 4 years. I'd taken inspiration from that. I'd sort of pitched to the ABC through a few friends of mine who worked there, who'd worked in sport, that ABC should do like a Triple J of cricket. Great friend of mine, Steve Kinane, who'd been a Walkley Award winner on Triple J. Had lunch with him yesterday, actually, because he's in London right now. Francis Leach, Richard Hines, who was bashing around at the time. I don't know where Richard was working, possibly at the ABC then, maybe at News Corp. A couple of others, and was saying we should do a similar thing. We should do an alternative commentary, a little bit sweary, a little bit fun, and it can be like a red button for the ABC. And Geoff had been doing exactly that on the Raw, albeit without the infrastructure of ABC, just an internet stream essentially for the Border Gavaskar series earlier in 2013. So that led to us having a chat in a function the day that Australia wrapped up their 5-0 whitewash in Sydney in early 2014. And from there, it just became kind of obvious very quickly that we would end up working with each other. And by the end of that year, Australia were playing a test series in the UAE in late 2014. Geoff got the band back together to run a commentary of that from his sitting room in Brunswick with the vinyl and velour couches that he had in this Freemasons house that he'd been renting for 12 years where the rent had never gone up, and had like 8 bedrooms down the corridor, thoroughly dilapidated, complete, like the sort of place where people would crash for the night without even realising they'd crashed there. And I didn't leave for 2 weeks. I pretty much was strapped to his couch commentating on virtually every ball, having rocked up, as Geoff tells the story. I rocked up in my cricket whites after cricket, training one night, in my training kit to do day one, and basically didn't leave for a fortnight. And that's when we're like, right, this is going to be a thing. And the early days of talking about what the podcast might become started there, and it officially launched during the 2015 Ashes by the time in which we were both writing formally for the ABC.
That is an amazing origin story, and particularly as someone who's gone through, their own origin story of starting something. I think a lot of young people kind of wonder, what does it take and what does it look like to start your own venture of anything? And the scrappiness as well, I think, just kind of paints a beautiful picture of the realisticness of like what goes into it and how much time it takes for it to become, a mega success. Like, you've been doing this for 10 years now, which is incredible to think about. And I quite enjoy, you mentioned Geoff's colourfulness that he brings to it. I quite enjoyed the likeness that he made between the state of him in a music festival in early December and Riley Meredith is bowling in the Shield cricket the other day. But tell me a bit about when did you feel like the final word started to become a good thing in your mind? Was there a particular milestone, a particular guest, or a particular sort of, download number that you hit where you're like, we're actually onto something? This could become more than just a little hobby or side hustle. Hey guys, quick one. Are you either A, dreading going back to work tomorrow, or B, on a mission to fulfill your potential and get there as quickly as possible? If so, then you need to apply for the Sports Grad Method program. The program is designed to help you get a full-time job in sport as quickly as possible, and inside it, I distill the lessons I've learned from asking over 300 people how they got a job in sport. I'm talking professionals from the AFL, Premier League, cricket, NBA, Olympics, you name it. And I've combined it with the methods that not only got me hired by Cricket Australia before graduating, but also helped me double my salary during COVID. Sports Grad has helped people land over 700 roles in sport, and this program takes the guesswork out of an industry where most people think you need to get lucky. To apply for the Sports Grad Method program, head to www.sportsgrad.com.au/program. All right, back to the episode.
Yeah, good question. I haven't really thought about it in those terms, but I can tell you that 2015 Ashes was when we were given our first run up. Like, we were provided with the space by ABC, and look, it was probably like $50 ago or something. I don't even know anymore. Negligible amount of money, but it was the very fact that we were being paid something to make a podcast, and we did it in BBC studios. Each time it felt, kind of official. Don't know how many people were listening on ABC's platforms, but it was a thing. And it was renewed for the summer of 15-16, which was the summer when, in 15, it was an extraordinary 3 or 4 months for me, because I leveraged off that, and this is maybe a story that could be more applicable to the grads listening to this. I had that opportunity to commentate on Geoff's sofa. I'd made the decision to go full-time freelance around the same time. I spent a year working in the superannuation industry for the peak body, and that had ended at the end of the 12-month period. And I was like, well, I'm just going to have a crack at being a freelancer, see what happens, right? There's a Windies tour followed by an Ashes series. I'll sink or I'll swim, whatever will be, will be. And in doing so, when getting to the Caribbean, I don't want to say I'd lied my way into the commentary box, but they were looking for an Australian commentator, and there really wasn't anyone else who'd done it. Now, I had done it off the television in a rudimentary way, but I had done it. And they gave me the opportunity to do those 2 test matches on the, it was called the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation or something like that, across the islands of the Caribbean. Anyway, that was the one Aussie. Yeah, right. Yeah, something like that. I was the one Aussie on the comms team and got the chance to do a couple of test matches from virtually nowhere. And in the same swing as that, I knew I was going to England. I negotiated with ABC. I say negotiated. I pitched and they'd said yes to some writing work on every day of the Ashes series, which was in line with other work I'd done for them before. And I reckon what happened next was that they said, we've got this guy, Adam Collins, who's there with the ABC kind of peripherally. I was going to be doing videos with Jim Maxwell, and the first tour game was in Kent, and I got an opportunity to call on BBC on that very first tour game, which meant the second tour game at Essex, I already had my feet under the desk, did all 4 days of that. Jim was calling that with me, which was a real thrill, and he started providing me with, I guess, mentoring at that point. And I had a moment in that game where Nathan Lyon was bowling to the number 11 from Essex, who I used to be able to remember his name, and I can't now. His first name's Matthew. Anyway, and we were at Long On at Chelmsford. And if you know the Chelmsford ground, it's quite short, straight. And Lyon was drop kicked over Long On, straight through the commentary box window, straight through to where I was. And the ball was too far away from me to put in a diving effort to catch it, which would have been the perfect bit. But what it did do, the ball hit our mixer. Somehow we didn't go off air. And it took out my co-commentator, chap by the name of Pat Murphy, who for like 40 years over here was a huge name in broadcasting with BBC, both on radio and television, especially football, but cricket too. He wrote like 40 books. A lot of the high-profile cricket books in the 80s were written by Pat. So a lifer who was coming towards the end of his tenure there at BBC. And that audio did the rounds, as it does, right? These days, it would be the video that would do the rounds of the ball going through the comm box window, but the audio went around and BBC heard that. And I got lots of work with BBC during the summer, like doing like panel shows and punditry. You know, I guess I was a new, fresh Australian voice and had done some commentary for them. And North Hats played Australia in a 2-day tour game, became a 2-day game owing to the rain on day one. And there was like this beautiful day where North Hats made a stack of runs. A bloke called Stephen Crook, who was originally from Adelaide, made a 70-ball 100. It was my birthday. We went out on the piss with Crookie that night, who, you know, made the 100 against Australia. We went out to dinner and went out partying with him, which was heaps of fun. The next day he came back and took 3 quick wickets and had Australia under the pump. It was a really great couple of days. And that bit of commentary across that weekend at Wantage Road for BBC was the bit that I used to monkey bar into working for Test Match Special. That particular Ashes series had 5 test matches in the usual way. And then they played a 1-day series afterwards, which, you know, these days it wouldn't happen in quite the same way. But then it was the custom for 1-dayers and test cricket to be bundled together. And Jim Maxwell was going home, as he would after the test matches. There was a vacancy for an Australian commentator, and I was invited to take it up. So I went from, at the start of my journey, blagging my way onto Caribbean radio on the back of having worked with Geoff on the sofa, to at the end of the summer making my international debut for the most time-honoured and prestigious radio broadcast in the world on BBC's Test Match Special for 1-dayers at the end of the summer. So it was a crazy few months in my life. I was writing for newspapers. I was writing for the Wisden Cricketer's Almanac. I was suddenly everywhere doing lots of TV stuff. Like, I don't really even now understand how it happened so quickly, but it did. Proximity, got to be there. I often say to young freelancers who want to make it, you've got to be there. Somehow get yourself in situ, somehow fund it. If you're sleeping on floors, if you're scrapping about, just being there is the first step in having something of an opening. And having enjoyed that, the ABC had offered Geoff and I to stay on for the summer, 15-16, the first as Smith as captain. It wasn't a particularly important summer as far as Test cricket goes. Australia probably won all of them, I think, from memory. Certainly they beat New Zealand 3-0. I think they beat the Windies 2-0 and 1 draw. But we were there in situ. We were on doing the lunchtime programming. We were making the podcast once a week in ABC studios. And it meant that even though we were fledgling and we were junior and we were finding our way and we were far from the finished product, we were getting our air miles up. As Gerard Whateley once put it to me about commentary, you've just got to get your air miles up. You've got to basically spend as much time doing this stuff as you can. And eventually you become more confident, more competent, and you find your own voice. And that's, I suppose, for me, where the commentary story and the podcast story started in sequence, running in a direction that a couple of years later would be able to, well, become my full-time existence, and I could start to eventually start doing that in favour of writing.
I've heard Jerry Seinfeld say a very similar thing in regards to comedy, how in the early days it is just a game of tonnage, just how much can you write, how much can you get out there to get your air miles up, as you say. So it's interesting that Jared Waitley has that parallel there.
Yeah.
Another group of creators who kind of share parts of your story there is, are you aware of the Marmalade guys on Instagram, the footy guys who just travel around on TikTok at the moment?
I'm not, but that'll be a function of me not being on TikTok for my that purely down to generation gap with you and me, mate. I feel like if you're on TikTok and you're 41, like I don't know, maybe I'm misreading the situation, but maybe I should be. Maybe I'm the one that's got this entirely wrong.
Maybe.
Well,
there's two guys, Checkers and Treyas, who they got a whole stack of followers now. They basically go to pretty much every single game of the footy season, just creating little reels and little videos to the point where the AFL's flying them around now. But similar to what you mentioned, they shared their origin story recently, and one thing that kind of grabbed me by surprise was the fact that they funded all their travel around the country to go to as much footy as they can to capture as many videos as they could until eventually they hit a tipping point where someone was willing to pay them to go. And it sounded like you kind of went through a similar sort of baptism by fire to get to a point where you're like, okay, we can tell this guy's committed and now he's got his air miles, so we'll send him.
Yeah. That's really well summed up. I mean, it's still part of our story with Geoff and me, even now, is that we fund our operation privately a lot of the time. And admittedly, the business is strong and robust, so we're not sleeping on floors and the types of things we did in 2015 and in those early couple of years when we had to really scrap around. But we're still hustling, bustling freelancers, both of us. Like, if there is a spare bed in a hotel going, like I will sleep in that spare bed. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not shy about saving $200 here and $200 there. It's the nature of being a business person, really, is that you invest money in areas that are going to grow the business, and you save money in areas that are sunk costs, or you can avoid turning them into sunk costs. I'm constant looking to cut corners, maybe on my own goodwill, in favour of investing money elsewhere from the final word pot, if you like. But yeah, the air miles thing with commentary, it meant that I was really lucky that in my first few years as a broadcaster, I got to do a vast range of work. The 2017 Women's World Cup, I was doing the television and the radio. So I was doing BBC, and I was doing the world feed for TV. So that was going to everywhere. So that gave me a great opportunity to do women's cricket, which I'd invested in with Geoff on the podcast, but I'd never really commentated on. And suddenly there was this prized opportunity to do that. I mentioned the 2019 World Cup as a great example of pinging around, working on commentary. SEN did the back end of that, but it was the world feed earlier in the piece. The 2017 Champions Trophy in England, again, doing BBC for that, and ABC as well. The 2017 Tour of India that Australia went on, ABC bought the rights for that. So Jared was out for the first couple of tests, and then Alistair Nicholson did the second, the third and the fourth. And I was there for all four. So I was involved in the broadcast across all four test matches. The first time that I'd done like grown-up test cricket, doing an Australian test match for the ABC had its own prestige to it. I'd done one-day cricket for ABC. I'd done TMS stuff that had been simulcast, but never actually been in the hot seat on a test match playing day, and that led to its own opportunities thereafter. So yeah, those early formative years before I was fully ensconced with SEN, and that happened from 2018, the Sandpaper series and beyond, really, which I was also in the hot seat for. And then from there, it's become more a consistent thing where I do certain bits of commentary around the world, and I'm really happy with my lot in life on that front, and are able to sort of enjoy that for what it is and spend any other surplus time working on creative projects, working on growing the business, and working on growing the podcast to be as strong as it is. And it's been a full-time pursuit, the podcast, for Geoff and me, as in it's been our biggest thing since even before the pandemic. I'd say 2019 is when we turned the corner, where we went, right, this is our thing. And from 19 onwards, that's been priority number one. When you wake up in the morning, it's not about like, how do I get a commissioned 800-word piece in the Guardian newspaper tomorrow? It's like, right, how do I use my time wisely to grow the pod and to make sure that we keep putting out excellent episodes as often as we can?
You mentioned your attention on the business side of what you guys do. And as someone running their own venture, I'm always interested in how other creators or other business people, make money, particularly in the space that that you guys play in. And there's an interesting guy called Kevin Kelly who wrote an article called 1,000 True Fans, which basically says that 1,000 true fans is all you need to make a living off whatever your idea or venture is. And with the theory that if you get 1,000 people paying you $100 a year, that's a full-time income of $100K a year. And I was wondering, how has the Final Word as a venture grown over time from a commercial point of view? In terms of, was there one particular revenue stream that kept you going in the beginning to what are the multiple streams that you guys accept now?
So early days, and I consider early days everything up to probably the moment when there was the rights acquisition in 2018 in the UAE, which we might come to. But I did a big thing then, and that probably changed the fortunes of Final Word and Geoff and me, because suddenly our partnership was being written about a lot, and there was a documentary made and various other things. So before that, like pre-UAE 2018, the podcast was sporadic. It was frustrating. We wanted to do more of it. We didn't have the resourcing for it. There was once an episode where someone at ABC at the time was like, what we should really do, we should have a podcast about cricket. And he didn't know that we'd made like 50 eps for them. What it did demonstrate to me is that we were nowhere. And after that 2018 moment, what had happened earlier in 2018 was that coincidentally, not coincidentally at all, really, the guy who had produced our coverage in South Africa, a bloke by the name of Jay Mueller, who's an unbelievable human being. I can recommend getting him on your pod at some stage. He's one of the most impressive people I've ever worked with, and one of the people I'm proudest in the world to be a friend of, to be honest. He's just a beautiful man. Jay hails from America. He's been the boss of so he speaks with this beautiful, thick American accent. He was the executive producer of Hot Breakfast on Triple M with Eddie Maguire for a long, long time. So I first had a connection with him when I worked for Swanee, and he would request interviews with politicians in that era. But he moved to SEN when there was a change in ownership in 2018. He was Jared's producer initially, and thus he came out and produced us in South Africa. But Jay always had a side hustle, a secondary operation running a podcast company. And I had this idea with Dan Brettig, who's now the chief cricket writer at The Age, and Shannon Gill, who I've known forever through various things. He worked at Cricket Australia, the AFL, politics. Gilly and I go back to when we were virtually teenagers.
I've played cricket against Gilly.
Right, yeah. The president of Manningham Cricket Club to this day, I'm pretty sure he is still charging and doing his thing with this pink ball. This was the original pink ball that Kookaburra produced in 2015. I often hold it when I'm recording. It sits on my shelf. Gilly gave me this the week of the first pink ball test match in Adelaide. Anyway,
well, Manningham got a great relationship with our Wycliffe Cricket Club.
Nice to hear it. But no, so the three of us had been talking forever about our affection for the 1993 AFL season and our argument that it was the strongest footy season ever for lots of different reasons. If you want to know why, if you're a young person listening to this, listen to the greatest season that was 93, which was the first podcast that we made, a 20-part series that went absolutely nuts. So the Final Word had never gone nuts. And I make this other podcast that went to number one in the sports charts like in week 3, and it had huge cut through. We nearly won an AFMA. But we did this thing. All of these incredible people from 25 years earlier shared their remarkable stories, from the late Robert Walls. It's but one of many examples. Blighty came on. I mean, there were so many people who told their story of their 93 seasons, and it became a bit of a cult hit, and it was on Jay's label. So I went to Jay, and having enjoyed this success with him, and said, look, I've got this cricket pod. You know Geoff, you know me. You've worked with me in South Africa. We'd love to bring it into the stable. And he's like, sure thing, boys. Go for it. Here's how we'll do it. And before you know it, we were organised and we knew what we wanted to do. We had a little bit of money coming in. Kookaburra were our first sponsor, actually. Not a lot, but a little bit of money, enough money to justify our existence through the early days. We made like an episode a week through 18, 19, some version of that. I think we were doing some midweek stuff on video for Kookaburra as well. And by 2019, I'm like, right, the real turning point. Sorry, I'm answering this question 3 different ways, but
I'm enjoying it. Keep going.
Probably deserves the context. The real turning point, I was in Zimbabwe covering a tri-series that Australia were playing in 2018. Australia, Pakistan, Zimbabwe, 1 week of cricket, all T20s. They were starting at 9 a.m. each day at Harare. And I was one of 2 journalists covering it, one from Cricket Australia and me. So it was a great time. and we and in that the Football World Cup was running at the same time in Russia. And every morning, so I was working, I wasn't really following the football too closely. I was listening to a podcast that was being made by a friend of mine, Jonathan Liu, who's now one of the senior sports writers at The Guardian. In fact, he's just moved into politics. But Johnny Liu, one of the best sports writers in the world, he and I were mates. I was listening to and he and Jack Pitbrook were making these 20-minute recaps of the World Cup day. I'm like, that's a bloody good idea. If I'm taking in all what I need in 20 minutes from these football matches, which I'm peripherally interested in, what if Geoff and I do exactly the same thing from the Men's World Cup in 2019? Jay will get these podcasts out for us. Jay wakes up for breakfast radio. He'll be up at 4 a.m. anyway. He'll turn around these podcasts for the Australian market at 5 a.m. or whatever it is. And we strung together a couple of commercial arrangements, one with RSN, one with Seabus Superannuation. I think that was the only other commercial partner. That was our first proper, serious commercial partner who backed us in the UAE in 18 and backed us again for this daily podcast. And by the end of the run, we did 47 eps from the World Cup. We did 30 or so episodes from the 19 Ashes series, which was an absolute belting series. And the ECB don't care if you use the field of play to record. So we were videoing it all and recording in all sorts of interesting places on the field. And it springboard us into a whole different sphere altogether. So that idea of like listening to someone else's project and going, that could be applicable to our sport and to what we want to do and where we want to grow. And that's what got Geoff and me our podcast air miles up. We went from being, a once or twice weekly issues-based show, and that was our lot, into a like rapid response, quick, fast and furious, detailed-paced daily show. And it showed our breadth, let us flex our muscles on games of cricket that most people wouldn't have a clue that were even happening. Teams like Bangladesh and Pakistan or whatever, who they may not know the players from. And we've been there at the games, watching it, commentating on it, writing on it for The Guardian. And that was really the big difference. By the end of the 19 summer, we enjoyed that first mover advantage from having gone really hard in 19 before the idea of a daily show had really taken hold in cricket. And that's what gained us like literally thousands, maybe tens of thousands of listeners in the space of 3 months.
Yep. Amazing. So it sounds like that really opened the door for more commercial partnerships. But along comes Patreon as well, which I believe you guys activate too. Yeah. And you're writing books. Yeah. Are there any other, you're doing shows too, I believe?
Yep. So Patreon happened at the start of all of that. So 19, we knew we were going to go on this run in England. So we started Patreon there. Started small. These things always do with crowdfunding. But we had this guy... we have this guy. He's a great man. His name's Philip Meng. And Phil Mengy, I've played cricket with him a number of times now. He's been in the UK and I've played with him in Australia as well. Mengy, with Patreon, you can send in like $2, $5, $10, whatever. That tends to be the standard. If you chip in $5 a month, we'll give you a coffee mug, and, $10 a month, and we'll let you have early access. We never really did any of that, but we just had these levels. And Phil Meng sent in, he edited his number to a bespoke 222. Oh, that's a bit weird. Then we worked out what he was doing. It was homage to Richie Benaud's 222, 2 for 22, whatever it is. And then all of these people started copying him and sending in bespoke cricket numbers. I'm like, what? It was organic. Then we started encouraging it. People were editing their patron currency, or they were sending in new currency. And suddenly we had hundreds of these numbers, streaming in, which was helping give our patron this enormous kickstart, and it lent itself to a spin-off show. But we get these numbers and these clues from all over the world. Some of them are, straighty 180, throwdowns, and some of them are totally obscure. And the job for Geoff and me and our team is to work out what they mean. And then we tell a story. 4 numbers a week get featured on our weekend show, Storytime. And then last year, a publisher came to us and said, we love your Storytime spin-off show. We'd love to turn it into a book. So we picked out 22 of our best stories of the thousands we've now done, and we beefed them up and turned them into 22 chapters. And that's Bedtime Tales for Cricket Tragics. It's out in Melbourne or in Australia on the 25th of November. Got a book launch at the Great Commercial Club Hotel in Fitzroy on the 27th of November. Everyone's welcome to come along that night. You get a free beer on entry from our friends at Stomping Ground.
I didn't know you were doing the Melbourne launch. I saw that you had one in Vauxhall, but
got a London and a Melbourne. We normally do a live tour in the summer for live shows, but we've for reasons of they're exhausting and they're a lot of work. We've just decided to take a year off from the live shows.
Yeah.
So we did a national tour last year, so that's a revenue stream as well. But yeah, commercial partners, we're extremely proud that it's a bit of a daisy chain thing, right? You get a C bus and that leads to one other and another and another, and you've got to work bloody hard. Like, so much of my life is kissing frogs, right? Saying to people, come and work with me. Here's what I'll give you. Here's what you'll get in way of audience. Here's why you're linking up with the podcast that, the Wisden Almanac's called the best cricket podcast in the world and the gold standard. And here's a picture of us winning the Australian Sports Commission award this year for the best sports podcast. And here's our numbers and whatever. And then they go, no, too hard, too complicated. Never done a podcast ad before. I'd rather stick with what we know. And you get other businesses who are like, yeah, you know what? We'll do that. That seems like a good dart to throw at the dartboard. We over-deliver. They like us and they re-sign up again and again. And that's kind of the way that we grow scale. In a perfect world, I'm always in the market for new partners, Adam at fundrealcricket.com. But that's the nature of the business. That ads that are run by our label, other live show projects, our Patreon, we've diversified it in such a way that we're not reliant on one stream necessarily, but all roads lead back to Patreon. If not for Patreon, we wouldn't have the stability to do everything else, because commercial relationships by their nature are volatile and they do bounce around. Whereas Patreon, as long as it keeps where it is and keeps growing, that lays a foundation under what we do and provides us with the stability to basically pay our staff. And then anything on top of that, we pay ourselves. That's the nub of it.
Yep. Well, I was going to ask you, inevitably when you do something for yourself, the skill that everyone has to learn is how to sell themselves or whatever their venture has to be. Was that something that kind of came naturally to you? Did it develop during your political days? How did you kind of grow that skill set? One, to kind of understand what is the Final Word podcast worth, and then the best way to pitch it in and close those deals for yourself.
It's extremely hard. Lots of people have tried to sell for us, and it's really difficult. Ultimately, it's got to be Geoff and me over a coffee table, or the digital equivalent or the virtual equivalent thereof, doing what we're doing right now. There's no cold email has ever resulted in someone coming to me and saying, "Oh, I'd love to invest in your business." It always involves like the graft. There are no shortcuts. There are no short corners when it comes to selling. I've learnt over the journey, and that's not just true of my business. It's true of anyone who's doing anything remotely creative. You've got to take the prospective client on a journey with you, and make them realize over time that this isn't some speculative thing. It isn't about, it's not about charity. It's about saying that if you work with us, your story will be amplified in a really authentic way. Like, we like to partner with brands that we're really feel close to. We haven't always gotten that right. Like, there's one obvious example where we partnered with a brand, I won't say who, that didn't feel right. It always felt a bit wrong. And I labored through those months because I knew in my heart, in my soul, I knew it was a bad fit. But once you've signed a contract, you signed a contract. We won't make that mistake again. We've never taken a dollar from the betting industry and never will. That's an example of where the easiest money, almost every enterprise online in cricket, somehow comes back to sports gambling or sports advertising. And we've never taken a dollar from anything in that space. We've advocated against cricket being linked to betting and the Bet365 addiction that Cricket Australia have had over the years. And hopefully through the leadership of Todd Greenberg, they'll break the habit there. He seems committed to, over time, seeing 365 divest. That's certainly the implication I got from an answer he gave me in an interview earlier this year. But diverting from the primary point, you've just got to get out there and hustle and treat it like a full-time job, which is grueling. My father-in-law said to me that when you run your own business, you never have a day off, and there's no truer word of that. Certainly when it comes to the commercial part of the business and trying to explain to people why we will, and we're bloody good at our ads. Like, we're really proud of how we bring sponsors and clients in and we make them part of the DNA of the show. This isn't about like a 30-second drop in. It's like Geoff and I learning your business, becoming thoroughly immersed in it, then telling the story to our very enthusiastic, loyal audience. And over time, that connection becomes an obvious one. That's where the true value is in sponsoring something like us, as opposed to buying 4 inches in the Herald Sun or buying a 30-second spot on Channel 9, which nobody's watching linear TV at the time now anyway, right? Like, I mean, people are, but the habits have changed. The intimacy of a podcast, it's comparable to the intimacy of like breakfast radio when you're jumping in the shower with your, with the radio on 20 years ago. People are now jumping in the shower with their phone, listening to a podcast. And there's something to that, I think, as well, that you take podcasts with you wherever you go. And I think that leads to an extra level of intimacy with the hosts and the shows that people choose to listen to.
Interestingly, during my early days in the commercial team at Cricket Australia, I did have to grind my way through preparing the commercial decks for Bet365. So I understand your sentiment. But on that topic of selling your venture, was there any particular advice that stands out in terms of how that you received on how to do that better? Or was there any books or any resources that kind of helped you with your pitching, so to speak?
I wish I had probably read some books on it, to be honest. It's just, honestly, it's just relationships and just trying so hard to explain why this is. I think most marketing executives or people with budget to spend who sign the checks, they tend to be older, right? Like they're more senior, therefore they're deeper into their career. And whilst they might listen to podcasts recreationally, they may not be as across the value in them that I described before. Because, if you're buying, the proverbial 4 inches in the Herald Sun or the 30-second spot at 8:27 on Channel 7, there's a rate card there. You pay what the value is, and the value is what the value is, and so it's ever been, right? With us, it's a process of negotiation. I will say to you, we want to do something together. I'll get a feel for what your budget might be. I'll throw a number out there. You'll throw a number out there. I'll go, right, well, we can't do that for that, but we can do this. And I'll over deliver on this so that next time you want to do that. And they go, oh, okay, well, had something come in today like that. I've pitched a pretty normal number to a prospective client. They've come back and lowballed me. It's obviously frustrating when that happens, but I'll be like, okay, well, maybe we find some middle ground, but maybe we don't. Maybe it is that parcel of money. Maybe that's the budget and that's the budget. And I'll need to find a way to harness that bucket of money from them and make it work for them in a more limited way on our show to incentivize them to give us more money next time. So there's no hard and fast, is I suppose what I'm saying here. You have to be thoroughly aware of each individual business's wants and needs and tailor the pitch and tailor the sell accordingly. Otherwise, you end up being too dogmatic. And there are people who've worked for us before who are like, this is worth X, and they go out and they send a deck around, and if person coming back to them doesn't sort of immediately bite their hand off, they're like, oh, they didn't want to buy it. I'm like, well, no, let's talk to them anyway. Let's see what they might buy. And that's where I mentioned before that the best person to sell yourself ultimately is Geoff or me as founders.
Yep. What's the old adage? The value of anything is whatever someone's prepared to pay for it, and the more trial and error, the quicker you find out. So I can totally relate to that. Speaking of deals, you mentioned buying the rights to the UAE Tour in 2018. Can you tell us the story there?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'll try and keep. I know I've given some pretty long answers here. I'm sorry if your listeners have.
That's right. We love long form.
Sometimes people can. I'll give the abridged version anyway because it is a pretty detailed answer. So sandpaper happened. I'm going to tip that 97% of people listening to this, if I say sandpaper, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I won't describe it any further, other than to say I was on commentary for it when it happened. Wow. And I was leading the SEM broadcast as it was playing out. It was all extremely full on. It was the Cape Town Test match, third in the series, a hostile series. It was all happening. The teams hated each other. There was stuff going on off the field. There was some brutal stories about some of the stuff in the crowd, the abuse, the misogyny, the works. It was as tense an environment as I've ever experienced in professional sport. And then sandpaper happens. And it's all related to that, by the way. Not excusing what happened, but it's related to all the other things that were going on at the time. And I've written and spoken about this at length if people are curious to hear more about that particular thread. Anyway, so at the end of that, there are the suspensions, Smith, Warner, Bancroft. There's turmoil at Cricket Australia. Eventually, the chairman hits the fence. The chief executive hits the fence. A range of others lose their jobs. There's a culture review. There's a secondary review. It is a state of flux. Justin Langer takes over as coach. Tim Payne takes over as full-time men's captain. It's all happening. And their next test series, acknowledging they played some white ball stuff in the middle of the year, was to be played against Pakistan in the desert, in Dubai and Abu Dhabi in the first 2 weeks of October 2018. Might have been week 2 and week 3. Basically, it clashed with trade period. Clashed with footy trade period. So at the time, and look, earlier on in the year, in 2018, and indeed before that, I'd had the idea of buying the radio rights for a test series. It had been rattling around in my head for a couple of years. I knew that it was something that may not bankrupt me. I knew that it could be the sort of thing that could return me a commercial profit if I got it right. And I knew that it could be an extremely fun thing to try. And I knew I had the people around me who could do it with me. I didn't quite know what it would entail logistically and technologically to do it, but I knew there was a thing sitting there. And I knew this going all the way back to 2013, when the first test series that Geoff did off the television before I met him, the ABC didn't go to that series. Quite famously, Test Match Sofa, who I mentioned before, those guys on the sofa in London, they were the commentary that the ABC put on their website, the sweary, beery commentary of Test Match Sofa, because the ABC didn't go. And that was kind of the beginning of the end for the ABC in terms of they occasionally do stuff overseas. I don't want to say they don't go at all, but that was the first sign that the ABC would change the way they would cover Test cricket into the future. It was that series in 13. And then 14, UAE, that's when Geoff and I first teamed up, and that's another series that didn't have radio commentary outside of what we were doing in Geoff's house in Brunswick. So since then, I thought there might be an opportunity at some stage when the rights go unpurchased, when there's no radio commentary, that I could slot in and fill the gap in the market. Maybe, possibly. And for South Africa, for all money, it felt like no one was going to buy the rights. It just looked like the ABC weren't going to go. And it looked like, and that's before SEN had been taken over, as in before they had their acquisition with Croc Media and Craig Hutchison. And I was thinking, yeah, I'm going to have a crack at this. And I told a colleague that I was going to have a crack. I had IMG talking to me, who were the intermediary, selling the rights for Cricket South Africa. I thought I'd arrived on a number which seemed vaguely doable. I thought, yeah, okay, if I buy the rights for this and I build the commentary for that, it's going to be hard work, but I've got a couple of months, it's probably worth the risk. And then I got a phone call one night from Craig Hutchison, who'd just taken over from SEN. Never met him before. He had spoken to my mate, who became a colleague of his, and he goes, there's this guy called Adam Collins who's going to buy the radio rights for the South Africa series. And he called me and he goes, how about I buy the radio rights? I'm a radio station already, just starting off with SEN, and you come and work for me for this test series. I'm like, good as gold. What a terrific outcome. I still get to do the series, no risk of blowing up in my face, away we go. Then later in the year, post-sandpaper, the next test series that I referred to before, October 2018, SEN, in their infancy under this new management, were all in on the trade period, because that is their stock and trade, footy trade period, trade radio, huge thing for them. Craig Hutchie said to me at the time, we're not going to be able to do this series. We'll give you a bit of support. We'll lend you some kit, but we can't go all in on a test series right now. We're not at that stage. And ABC, I worked out pretty quickly, weren't going to go. I'm like, shit, there's going to be no radio commentary. So I sleuthed who the right person was at Pakistan Cricket to call, and I just called them, called their commercial director and said, I'm just this guy. I've got this idea. By that stage, I'd spoken to my friends at Wisden.com and the proprietor of that website at the time, who's a friend and colleague, and said, what do you reckon? Why don't I try and buy the rights, and we call it Wisden Test Cricket, and we run it on your platform. We drive all the traffic to Wisden exclusively, and you do some shape-shifting thing that's never been done before, where a test series is broadcast straight to a website, and everyone's drawn to your website for a fortnight in a series that's going to have huge interest because of the sandpaper stuff. And he's like, all right, have a crack, see how you go. I got this guy from Pakistan Cricket to agree to basically negotiate with me, like most things in life. He said one number, I said another number. We landed halfway between the two numbers. Then I'm like, shit, I've got this thing. This is happening. I didn't have a lot of money at the time. I was living with my then girlfriend, now wife, in her studio apartment. I didn't really tell her that the truth is my family and I had an apartment in East Melbourne, which we just sold. So I had basically what was the guts of a house deposit for what Rach and I were going to do and buy the house I'm in right now. Not that we'd found it at that point. So the best way to describe it at that point is I was betting with a house deposit that I'd make the money back. I was
She
betting
would've
with what
loved
I'd
this.
accrued from, and she didn't like fully know that she did know, but maybe didn't quite understand the degree to which I was taking a punt. And I knew I had to build a credible commentary team. So I was going to lead the commentary. Geoff was going to be over there. He was suddenly my other ball by baller. I needed some special comments guys. I knew Brendan Julian from having worked with him before. BJ's like, good as gold, no worries, Colo. Yeah, I'd love to do it, mate. BJ's a great man. Mike Hussey. I think I got Huss straight away as well. I'd done some work with Crick Buzz with Huss. He goes, yeah, no worries. I'm doing TV. Happy to come in and help you out with a spotter session. Buzzard Khan, who's the cousin of Imran Khan, former Test cricketer and broadcaster himself, got put in touch with him. He was happy to do it. So suddenly I had a Pakistani voice. Had my friends and colleagues Pete Lawler, Dan Bredig, Louis Cameron, who were all in situ for the series. I said to all of them, can you come in and work with me? They all said in different ways they all could. So Pete was going to be my main journalistic special comments guy. Dan Bredig, who I was rooming with, came and helped. Louis Cameron had never done it before, but I had a feeling Big Louis would be good on radio, and I was right. And we had a commentary team, like a proper, real commentary team. And then became the hard part because it was only 10 days before the series was starting, hadn't sold a single dollar, and I had a holiday with Rach to Croatia in between. So I spent the whole holiday on the phone back to Melbourne, desperately trying to sell this thing. Cricket Australia bought it for their website, as in they bought the stream to put on their website. I got Specsavers on board.
Who were you selling it to at Cricket Australia?
Finn Bradshaw at the time was running the website. So Finn, I don't know how much money CA gave me. It wasn't like a life-changing sum. They just gave me a fee to reproduce Wisden Test cricket on their website, which of course we were thrilled with. Specsavers came on board by dint of it being on CA's website. Cbus came on board for the first time with us. We're still working with Cbus now, 7.5 years later. It shows, you get a relationship, brilliant organisation to work with, cherish having them as our long-term final word partner. This wasn't final word, it was Wisden Test cricket, but it was Geoff and me, right? It was our thing. And Geoff went away for a long weekend, and he came back from the long weekend back into phone reception, and the story goes, I go, mate, I've done it. We've got to work very, very hard here. It was very expensive to do all the back-end stuff, which I didn't anticipate any of that. And and I got Coles on board midway through, got Budgie Smuggler on board, thanks to my mate Sam Perry, who had them with Grade Cricketer at the time. They were their sponsor, and he helped me out with them. And we just patched it together. And on the third day of the second test match, I washed my face. I got there with 1 day to go in the series, got everyone paid. I would have debt financed it myself, but everyone got to where we needed to be. And you probably remember that the first test match was an absolute thriller with Usman Khawaja batting for 8 hours in the fourth innings to save the tests, with Tim Payne and Nathan Lyon batting out an hour at the end. And it was seen as this triumph of Australian cricket against the odds, batting out a draw for 5 sessions when, they were in the dirt after what happened in South Africa. And it just felt like the whole world was listening to our commentary. Like for those couple of hours at the end from around the world, our social media was going bananas. And we're like, we've kind of done it. We did the thing we talked about doing. And it led towards a number of really lovely things in my life. Lots of people wrote about it, and there was a beautiful ABC documentary made about it. And the film rights were sold. There's still a film in the offing about it, which is a lovely thing. If it gets made one day, that'd be great as well. It's just a moment in time when I took a punt with a house deposit and managed to get there in the end.
Mate, that's an incredible story. And one theme I'm seeing pop up time and time again with your career is that willingness to take a punt on yourself and make something happen out of nothing, whether it's, scrapping through your political career to, starting the final word to then buying the rights, and let alone, I'm sure, some other things we could talk about too. But, a lot of people I talk to, or even in the entrepreneurial world, they might do that once and then kind of sit back. But it seems like you have this desire to chase that next thing time and time again, which I don't know, you might think is a good thing or a bad thing from time to time. But
it's probably my hardwiring. Yep. I've realised I've learned a lot about the way my brain's wired in the last couple of years. Done a lot of work on myself, as they say. Just like everyone else, I've got ADHD, and that's not fair. I didn't mean that. Not just like everybody else. I'm not being. I'm not diminishing my fellow neurodivergent friends out there by saying that. But I've realised now there's the drive bit that a lot of people with ADHD have about like just being driven to do the next thing, whatever the next thing is. So ADHD is far from a great thing. I'm not pretending that it doesn't leave other people with enormous challenges, and I've had challenges from it too. But I think that the good bits about it are the bits that enable. There's some impulsivity built into this, which sometimes can backfire. But the good bits, when they come off, mean that you can be driven towards achieving things that might look like pretty challenging at the outset. So yeah, I think there's a bit more about the way I am, which leads towards things like this than I perhaps realised at the time.
No, I can relate a lot to that, mate. And if you were doing that series in 2018, I'd just started in the digital team at Cricket Australia and did all the reporting on anything digital related. So traces of that probably came across my spreadsheets of stats at that point in time.
Hope so. Yeah. Hope so. Yeah, I think. Well, from memory, we got told at the time it did really well on the CA platforms because there was the ability to obviously track how many people were listening. Like, I'll never forget the day before the first test when it wasn't working, when we were trialing it and the whole thing was in jeopardy. I mean, there's so many stories out of this. Like, we had to use a VPN to get the second test out because Abu Dhabi don't allow streaming because of their restrictive laws around people basically showing dissent to the government by using their phone to stream themselves. So we had to illegally buy. We got the second test out through a VPN through 3G back to Dubai.
Wow.
3G whole test match back. And had we been caught, it's punishable by going to prison if you use a VPN in Abu Dhabi. But I'm like, well, I've got to get the show out. Got these commercial partners. Got CA buying the feed. Got Wisden having done what they've done to get it off the ground. Had my producer Dono, who one of my best mates, another Hawthorn man, who came out and produced us when we were out there, and he found the VPN solution before these things were de rigueur. And yeah, that was a pretty hairy, wild bit when we just couldn't get the technology stuff to work. And it was a great yarn.
And you're like, this will hold up in court. We got to get the show out.
Yeah, I know, right? If they shackle me and put me in front of a magistrate, I'll say, but I just had to get the Test cricket on radio.
Exactly.
Don't know how that would have
It's
gone.
incredible hearing the amount of names that you've mentioned and the number of people that you've worked with over time. I'm sure you get just as many people reaching out to you for career advice, trying to break into sports media and journalism as well. I'm wondering, in terms of, I'm sure you've got great advice on what to do, but I'm interested in what are the things that people do wrong that perhaps lead to them not breaking in. Is there is there something consistent that you see in people that cause them to not make it, so to speak? Whether is it in their writing, is it the way they pitch a story, or their unwillingness to build relationships because they feel like, oh, if I just work on my craft, that'll be enough. Is there something that stands out to you that you feel like is worth calling out?
First thing I would say is you can never work too hard on your relationships. I think that's true of people working on the sort of on the lanyard side as well. I think that these things are the same on both sides of the divide. And I'm sure you have this in your literature, in your course, that every coffee is an investment in a relationship that might turn into something worthwhile. And I hate to be cynical and crude, but that is time often better spent than the time one might have spent at university learning how to, I don't know, doing a sports management degree or whatever it is. I would say that that's important to demonstrate that you've done the hard work to get a degree. I'm not discounting what a tertiary education provides to round out someone's, I guess, their education. But it's the networking, isn't it? It's the constant relationship building, which I think some people may not be as naturally disposed to. And I sometimes feel for them because that's the type of advice I provide, right? If I'm having if I'm one of the people being had a coffee with, if someone reaches out wanting to, and I'll often try, I really do try and say yes to those when I can. I think it's just good, it's good energy, right? Like a lot of people have taken the time to hear me out and hear out my ideas over the time. So if someone's in their early 20s and wants to do what I've done, I'm usually fairly pragmatic about telling them that it's hard to replicate the path that I took because I had a massive head start because of my career in politics and the relationships that I enjoyed before it all began. But still, trying to open doors up that way, and probably where people fall down is what you say there, not being as committed to relationship development as they can, and accepting that you're not the finished product when you start. I think there's a lot of people who are very confident. And that's okay. Confidence isn't a bad thing, but cocksure almost, right? Accepting that you got to continue being a sponge for a really long time. I still think that now. Like I'm obsessed with trying to, as a broadcaster, trying to think about when listening to others what they're doing well that I could do better. The minute you stop doing that and stops the process of self-improvement is a dangerous place to be, I think. And when working with people who are going to work on radio or television, there are things that you tell people, but you don't want them to copy you. There's a good example. My friend and colleague Tommy Morris, who worked with us last summer on SEN as the stats lead, stats and facts, a job that I did a number of years ago with SEN as well. But it was pretty obvious that he was going to be doing the Sri Lanka series with me as a ball-by-baller, something he'd never really done before. So he had done some ball-by-ball commentary, but not really at that on that sort of that discipline of doing it on radio, where there's a formula to doing it, and there are little tricks of the trade. And like I watched him soak it all in, the notes he was taking and the amount of time he was taking to listen and pay attention to how he could make sure that he could nail it on day one. Now, granted, he's got a profile and he's well ahead in his career, but it's an emblem of how, if you're a young person on the way through, you've just got to accept the fact that there are so many things that you don't know, and you should never shed that curiosity. Whether that's as a writer. And the other thing is, I think occasionally people are reluctant on the writing side to write. I think there are a lot of people out there who identify as writers, but don't actually work on their craft. So they don't go to the effort of starting a blog, or they don't go to the effort of writing for websites that, may not pay awfully well, but get them the equivalent of their air miles, but for writing. So yeah, I think there are some through lines from what you said in your question through to what I've seen, and I think most people who are incredibly determined to bash the door down find a way to bash the door down. Is my experience in life. If you really, really want it enough, and you're willing to put in the yards, there'll usually be a chance for you to get there. Then it shifts onto your shoulders, and whether you sink or swim once you get the chance.
You mentioned some of the formulas and tricks of the trade with regard to cricket commentary, ball by ball.
Yep.
I've had Brian Taylor and Hamish McLaughlin on the podcast, and both of them talked about in football commentary the 3 W's. Who's got it, where is it, and what's the score? Is there anything similar to that by way of a framework for commentating cricket ball by ball that you're sharing with Tom, or that you people follow?
Yep. The thing I always say is what Jim said. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Like Jim said something to me in 2015 in that Essex game, which has always stuck with me, and I do it religiously now. Get rid of the ball before the ball's bowled. So imagine bowlers on the way up to the crease. They're in there. Sorry, I'll stand close to the mic. Bad discipline, getting away from the mic. They get into their load up and they bowl the ball. I think a lot of people are inclined to say and bowls and delivers once the ball's left the hand, when I say bowled or delivers when they're on their back foot in their load up, because 99 times out of 100 they are going to bowl the ball. 99 times out of 100, the ball will release their hand. One time in 100, maybe one time in 200. For whatever reason, the batter will back out at the last second, or the bowler won't release the cricket ball. And sure, you've said bowled when they haven't bowled it, and you can fudge and you can work your way through. But what that provides you is an extra beat and the chance to take a sharp breath in to describe what's happening at the business end. Whether they've let the ball go or not, you've got to say it on radio. You've got to describe what's happened. Cricket on the radio is Stark, left arm over the wicket, on the way, 2 slips in a gully to the crease and bowls. That is your duty bound to set it up each ball for the listener on the assumption that, well, first of all, they can't see it. And second of all, they've just joined you then. You always have to remember that people are joining you all the time, and you can't take it for granted that they automatically know what's going on. So you need to say who's bowling and who they're bowling to. And at the other end, if that means that the batter has been caught on the crease, there's a shout for leg before, and it's been given, I've got enough time to say those things. If I'm saying and is delivered as the ball's hitting him on the pad, I've got next to no chance of getting it out in a coherent way. So I find that small little trick and McGilvray, I love the fact that McGilvray gave that piece of advice to Jim. So Alan McGilvray, the great Alan McGilvray, who did the synthetic tests from England in 1938, especially 1938, but did some in 1934 as well in the ABC studios in Ultimo, and then went on to become the voice of cricket in Australia on the radio from the 1948 Ashes series that was simulcast with BBC all the way through until when he finished up in the mid-1980s. He and Jim crossed over for about a decade. Jim's hero is Alan McGilvray, and McGilvray told that to Jim. Jim told that probably to many people, including me. And now I tell that to prospective ball-by-ballers that get rid of the ball before the ball actually is being delivered, and you buy yourself just that little bit of time.
That's a great little tip. I love hearing the brass tacks advice in media and commentary, because we as listeners and viewers just take it for granted what we see on TV and what we hear on radio as well. So to understand, there's a very strong method to the madness is really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's other bits too, right? Like there are ways of modulating your language. This is the Jared thing that he said to me very early on that stuck with me too. Jared's been a terrific source of advice and support to me across a long time now. He's like, you've got to learn how to drive in third gear. You've got to learn how to drive in the lower gears. You've got to learn how to drive. I think early on, I was excitable, and when there's big moments going on, you hit fifth gear too often or too early, and you've got nowhere to go. So I remember he said to me something like, you need to keep something in reserve for the equivalent of scores level grand final, 2 minutes to go. You need the overdrive button there, or thrilling finish to a test match, Edgbaston 23 or whatever, huge moment that will define a test series. You can go to that space, but almost every moment doesn't need you to go to sixth gear. You can give it big, and God knows I give it big in terms of projecting my voice when there's a big wicket, but you don't need to layer it with all the pathos. You don't need to go into you don't need to turn every moment into the most important moment. Not every cover drive is the most beautiful shot ever played. Driving within yourself, and it's not necessarily about an economy of words, although on television it is. On television, it's all about economy of words. But yeah, with radio especially, you need to have the ability to, if Jasprit Bumrah is ripping through Australia, the first wicket will sound different to the third wicket in the spell. The first wicket will sound different because that's the start of something. It's big. It's a huge moment. It requires going up the register, but the third wicket in a spell requires you to mid-collapse. That's a whole different vibe. And you need to make sure that you haven't got there too early.
Having gears for your commentary, that's a great metaphor to be able to control the energy they put into it. There's another guy, I think he's a public speaking expert, Vin, I forget his last name, but he talks about your voice as an instrument and learning how to control that. And it's interesting to understand how that comes out in the form of commentary.
Yeah, and look, I think that people are, and this is my view, not everyone shares the view about prep. I do a lot of prep before a match. I hold myself to a really high standard about how much I do. Others have a different view about doing very little prep and letting just whatever happens happen. But I think that if I'm stepping into a commentary stint and the four people, the two batters and the two bowlers, and the surrounds of the ground and the history between the teams and the umpires' names and the number of the test matches if all of that's somewhere in here and it's written down in front of me, I'm more likely, I think, to be able to talk with poise and control. If I'm only dealing with what's in front of me and I'm scratching around a little bit, that's when I think you can, I think preparation is a massive help in making sure that you feel like you are in command, like you are the one conducting the orchestra. And that's even more acutely seen on television. That button where you can talk to the director is your best friend. That lazy key, when you can tell the director and speak to them about, this batter or this bowler, can I get this, that, and the other from 3 overs ago? And there's something from 2018 where they did that. Can I get that and that? You spend more time talking ideally, more time talking to the director and doing the orchestra with the director than you are talking to the audience in a perfect world on television.
Mate, that's terrific advice and really cool to understand what goes into it for those people who aren't, pursuing careers in this space either. We've talked for a long time. I'm really enjoying this. If you got time, would love to chat about the Hawthorn stuff and your role in Andy's presidency.
Why not?
Awesome. Let's dive into it. You're involved in that by the purchase of the grand final car from the 1991 grand final. The Batmobile is what of course I'm talking about. Can you talk us about the origins of your involvement in Andy's election and how it dates back to this car?
Yeah, it goes back to probably 2007. It was on eBay. And me and my mates, mentioned before, the ones I go to the footy with, or had gone to the footy with forever before I moved over here and remained very close throughout our lives. It went for $7,000. And I was like, oh no, that would have been like $1,000 each. We could have done that, boys. Like, we should have done that. What were we thinking, kind of thing, right? And I made a pledge then that if it ever went up for sale again, I'd buy it. I just declared it there and then. We will find a way to buy it. And in the pandemic, in September 2020, what do you know? Went up on eBay, 7-day horizon. and I instinctively and stupidly put the highest bid in immediately. It was like, I don't know, it wasn't much. It was like $5,000. I knew I'd be able to get other people to jump in with me. I put the highest bid in, and I tweeted about. I might have been 10 grand actually, and then of course heaps of my mates would have been all in for chipping in the event that I got it for that price. And I told the story on Twitter. I said I'm the highest bidder on this, and I should obviously that was dumb because it brought it to the attention of more people, and said that I would buy it. And the Herald Sun picked it up and wrote a story saying that, you know, I'd tweeted about this and this was on sale, and that I was the highest bidder, right? And it continued to rattle along online through the week. And then I realised that I needed to obviously say nothing further and not get involved again. But by that point, the story had gotten legs, and a chap got in touch with me, Mark Hawthorn, who'd been the publishing editor of The Age many years ago. Hawk was involved in club subcommittees, and was a partner at CPR, still is, I think, which are a high-profile public relations and crisis management government relations firm in Melbourne. A lot of people in that business I've known over the years, and worked with and so on. And he got in touch with me and said, I saw the thing in the Herald Sun. Why don't we combine forces and we should buy it? I'm like, great idea. And I spent a few days whipping mates into shape saying, you know, I'm looking for $1,000 commitments from as many of you as I can get. That wasn't too difficult. I've got to say, it was the pandemic. People probably had a bob or two lying around. They hadn't gone outside for months. And it was the only game of first-class cricket played at Lords that season was the Bob Willis Trophy final between Essex and Somerset. I was commentating it on television for Sky, and the way it all played out was a Sunday afternoon. I remember all the details because how can you not? Such a weird time. And the auction was ending at 1 p.m, which was, as you know, that's when the lunch break's traditionally taken for any first-class game in England. 1 p.m. And I was on lead, and Mike Atherton was on colour, and I had told Ath what I was doing. Like, he knew before we went on air together that I had half an hour to go in his auction, and whilst on air, whilst commentating, like when we're on a break or whatever, I was going to put in our final bid, which was, I don't remember anymore. I think it was $30-something thousand was the final bid, whatever it was. Because you know, on eBay, you don't pay your bid, you pay $1 more than what the previous bid was. Yep. And at like 3 minutes to 1 p.m, I put in our final bid, which I think was actually quite a lot. Might have been more like $35,000 we put in, accepting that we would get it for less and whatever. And as the clock counted down to 0 and lunch was taken, there was no Comcam on me. I'm giving you the big ones. Fucking beauty. I got this thing over the line. My phone's blowing up like mad as I throw to the break. We're off to lunch. I get off there. I'm like, I've won this 11 meter, it was 7 meter, isn't it? 7 meter car, this Batmobile. And yeah, that was the moment that I'd realised we'd won it, and was connected therefore to not only Mark Hawthorn, but a bunch of other Hawthorn people in that process. And through those conversations around the Batmobile, it became apparent that there was a fairly strong through line of people who were pretty unhappy with the direction of the club at the time.
Just to pause you there, buying this car was kind of like buying a membership to, say, Royal Melbourne Golf Club, where it's a networking entry point.
You could say that. I mean, the difference here was that I didn't mean for it to. It's just the way things played out. I was the figurehead of this thing. So I was doing there was lots of like media interviews, and there was newspaper stories about it, and you know, different people. I think that 2020 grand final, someone loaned it out during the pandemic, whatever it was. Vic Rhodes, I'm friends with the then Rhodes Minister, and she immediately got in touch and said, Colo, I want to be really clear about this. Vic Rhodes will never, ever register this car. That's fine by me. It's going to sit in a shed in Footscray, and we'll take it out for, you know, weddings, parties, anything, I don't know. Special events, not that we do that too often. It stays in storage for 97% of the year. But yeah, it did. It entered me, and whilst in the past, I'd probably said to people that the club was being embarrassed on virtually a daily basis by what Kennett was doing publicly and on social media, and it felt like a symbol of the malaise of the club in those years leading up to roughly 2020, let's say. No one was doing anything about it. Like, he was getting board directors to sign their resignations as they went on the board so he could unilaterally sack them as he wished. It was very command and control stuff, right? We were hearing noises about this stuff, and it wasn't great, and there was a lot of dissatisfaction. The members were increasingly pissed off about this. That was easy to tap into. The Hawk Headquarters Forum, which I'd been involved in from its inception in 2001. It's been a private board for a long time, but a couple of thousand people on there, and every day there were people like citing reasons why the Kennett regime needed to change, basically. And that's when, not long after that, about 9 months after the Batmobile thing, we had those inaugural conversations on Zoom with about 8 or 10 of us about, right, are we going to pad up here and have a crack in these 2021 board elections? And if we are, how are we going to do it? What's the process? And I chaired that group, and initiated a group with Mark and 4 or 5 others, including my best man, Ben Foster, who was Daniel Andrews' strategy director then, and now runs. I better get the Foster, Macrone, Ratcliffe, Sims. I might have got the FSMR, a big consultancy in Melbourne now. Sarah Adams, who's been hugely important in a number of senior roles in corporate Melbourne. And Ed Bowman was involved as well before he went and joined the AFL, runs the AFL website now. So the bunch of us who are working on this together in the early days. And yeah, a lot of people got in touch signaling they'd like to support us. And one of those was Andy. And we knew that Andy was keen. He'd been the director of football during the three-peat. So he'd been on the board, and we knew he was keen for more. And it became pretty obvious that he was willing to get his hands dirty and campaign. And I mean, it's a epic tale, but the guts of it is that the first year we did it, we were successful in getting one Hawks for Change endorsed candidate elected, Ian Silk, who just finished up as the chief executive of Australian Super and a man of real pedigree in the business community. And he pulled out to facilitate an arrangement we came to with the Kennett people. And then year 2, the presidency was on the line. It was the triennial presidential election, and Kennett had a handpicked replacement who'd been his vice president. Andy said, I'll run against him, despite being friends with the candidate in question. Andy said, I'll do the right thing, I'll run. And then he got up, and James Molino, who'd been deputy premier, and was resigning from the parliament, he put his hand up as well, and he got up in the same board election. So in the space of 2 cycles, Hawks for Change candidates endorsed Hawks for Change candidates had become president and 2 senior members of the board, and I think they've all been re-elected now at different points. This year, Andy's up for re-election. It's probably next month, but I would be staggered if anyone runs against him at this point, despite the dissatisfaction from Kennett and others associated with him. The club's obviously moved on in leaps and bounds, as you would have spoken to Andy about when you interviewed him a couple of months ago.
Were there many parallels between your political career and this campaign to get Andy into power?
Oh, totally. No, I'm not going to shy. I mean, we were, I mentioned a few names there, a few of us quite experienced political campaigners there. We knew what we needed to do. We knew what the task was to promote amongst, we had 2,000 sign-ups in a day to the Hawks for Change platforms. So suddenly we had social media posts that were being amplified. We had hundreds and hundreds of people coming to these online rallies that Andy was speaking at or Silky was speaking at. Former Hawthorn Premiership player James Morrissey was involved, which was great at the time as well. He'd written persuasively about Hawthorn's addiction to poker machines at the time and why we should divest from them, which we now proudly have as a club. But we had that facility for a long time, a couple of facilities, which he took exception to, and quite right as well. So that became part of our story, that Hawks for Change didn't support being involved in the gaming industry anymore. It just had this extraordinary energy and momentum. And of course that leads to media interest. As you know, living in Melbourne, if there's a board challenge, that prompts a lot of stories, especially at this time of year when there's no footy. So lots of reporters were writing stories, and we were providing help to them to write their stories and telling them what we were all about. Andy was doing interviews. They were across what we were doing with the campaign. There was some pretty ugly stuff coming out of the Kennett camp about what we were and what we weren't. There was some outrageously inaccurate stuff that Kennett was saying in both years, which made things easier for us. Every time Kennett spoke, every single time Kennett spoke, it won us votes. It was one of those situations where he would go on radio and we were like, how good's this? What an absolute triumph. Whereas Andy would go on radio and be very reasonable. You know what he's like.
Lovely
man. Very reasonable. He's happy to concede a point to make a point. He's not from my political party, I hasten to add. He's a member of the Liberal Party. Like, people would go, oh, it's a Labor Party stitch-up. Well, Andy's literally a member of the Liberal Party. This is not a political thing. It's a getting the right people in position to help steer the Hawthorn Football Club to its next place. And it's in a much better place now. And I'm glad we've sort of put all that behind us in the club. Andy's big thing was unifying the club, and our big thing was supporting Andy and unifying the club. And unless I'm missing something, and maybe I am, I don't know, I don't live in Melbourne anymore, but the club feels as unified as it ever has in my lifetime. At the moment, the men's side of things, the women's side of things, the board side of things, it feels like it's absolutely purring. And that's the skill of someone like Andy, who's just a fundamentally decent human being, who doesn't think he's better than anybody. You saw that stuff when he had the megaphone out on the...
I love that.
The megaphone out on the bridge. That's just him. That's just him. Like, that's just his personality. It's like, he's not a command and control kind of guy. He's like, yeah, I'm just a guy that loves the club and loves footy and really wants a lot of experience in business and in change, especially. He's got history in change in his professional life. And he's like, well, the club needs change. I've got that skill set. I've worked as a director before. I know the game. I'm a premiership player. I tick a lot of boxes. I think I could probably make a contribution. And I'm so proud of him. Like, I feel like deeply, deeply in my heart. We all do. Like, every time Andy's on television, like, we feel deep inside this gushing pride for who he is and what he represents.
And as you should. I think I said it to you when we spoke on the phone a month or so ago. But having met Andy and had him on the podcast here, like, it was an awesome experience to be able to chat to him and understand what he's about. And as a Hawthorn supporter, just feel like the club is in a very good place. But obviously, you never get there on your own. Comes with a group of people, and to hear how that kind of dates back to your willingness to bash the door down maybe an 11th time in your career to buy this car, which leads to the Hawks for Change campaigning, is an incredible backstory to where the club is now. So you should feel proud.
Yeah, it's just nice. Like, I don't want anything from this. Like, I'm not coveting a seat on the... Like, people often say to me, do you want to come back to Melbourne and be on the Hawthorn board? I'm like, no, that's kind of missing the point. Like, I live in London and have no plans to move from here. And it was never about, like, any of us who are involved. Like, whilst there are people who were involved in Hawks for Change who would make outstanding board directors, do not get me wrong. None of us were doing it because we were careerist about it or we were trying to be entryist into the inner sanctum of the Hawthorn Footy Club. It was more that... we love it, right? Like, I've been going to the football since I was 2, and it's one of the defining characteristics of my life. And it was embarrassing for a while there to see the direction the club was going, and felt like we had the collective means to help with that. And I think we played a role, which isn't to say that, by the way, that everything that Geoff Kennett ever did was wrong either. I think it would be dogmatic and wrong and immature to say that Kennett's first term didn't come with it a lot of success. Objectively, that's the case. But yeah, the second time around, it was obviously a very different time, and he changed, I think, as well.
I've really enjoyed the diversity of this conversation, all the different stories you've collected over many, many years of doing weird and wonderful things. But I guess where I'd love to kind of wrap it up and leave it with is perhaps any advice that you would pass on to young people trying to break into the sports industry or try to conquer anything, because you've conquered many mountains in many different spheres. And so I'm wondering, is there one sort of consistent bit of advice you seem to give out often that you perhaps could share?
Can't get too far ahead of yourself, is the first thing. Like, I go through constant bouts of, like, difficulty in business, like not constant, but there are moments of doubt and there are moments of confusion, and by dint of that, moments of vulnerability, the need to be always sort of at some level have a degree of humility about you. Like, you're right. Objectively, I've been able to do some interesting and some fun things, and I'm proud of that. And a lot of hard work's underpinned that. But, like, there's no guarantees in anything, no matter where you get to. You see high-profile people who've got amazing careers who are only one or two missteps away from losing it all or from having to start again. So yeah, I think that's important to always remember that there isn't. You don't sort of you don't reach some place in life and suddenly just have the whole thing licked. There's always something more, and there's always something more to do or to learn or whatever. I like to think that's a fairly consistent theme. But yeah, that like don't sort of think that there is some secret bullet or some magic formula that can make you feel completely satisfied, and also to enjoy it. I think I've been guilty at times, without a doubt, I've been guilty at times of maybe not necessarily appreciating what I'm doing in the moment, because I find myself pulled in multiple directions, and I only look back in hindsight and go, gee, that was amazing, when I could improve at being able to acknowledge how amazing things are in the moment. Perhaps like, touring the world, and I don't know, when I was in Pakistan a few years ago, and like all that stuff's incredible, but I was so busy I probably didn't look up to see from the forest from the trees as often as I might. So there's that as well. On the journey, appreciate that you're doing things that will go back and go down with you as great memories, even if it felt like bloody hard graft at the time.
Amazing. Well, Adam, thank you for reaching out to me with adding context to Andy's story at the time that episode came out, and thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing your own journey, as well as the multitude of things that you've done. And it's been really interesting, kind of connecting the dots across the different things you've done, as well as the incredible practical advice you had for those people looking to break into media too. So, come the Ashes in 2027, we'll be taking you up on that offer of a day in the pavilion, and let me know about the exact dates for that book launch in Melbourne, because I'd love to get along to that as well.
Yeah, come along, 27 November, all welcome. Yeah, I think free beer on entry. I don't know who's on stage with us, but it'll be someone good.
Yep.
Geoff, me, and someone good. Thanks for doing this and taking the time. And I know I've given some extraordinarily long answers, and if you're someone who doesn't like that kind of thing, sorry about that. I guess, you get a head of steam when telling fun stories, and hopefully most of them have been fun. And yeah, if you want to hear more fun stuff, you can always find us somewhere on the internet doing what we do on The Final Word, sort of 250 times a year or something like that.
No, I've enjoyed it immensely. Otherwise, I would have called you in. But it's been fun to hear you let you go and hear the full extent of it. So thanks very much.
Cheers, Ruben.
Hey guys, quick one. Are you either A, dreading going back to work tomorrow, or B, on a mission to fulfill your potential and get there as quickly as possible? If so, then you need to apply for the Sports Grad Method program. The program is designed to help you get a full-time job in sport as quickly as possible, and inside it, I distill the lessons I've learned from asking over 300 people how they got a job in sport. I'm talking professionals from the AFL, Premier League, cricket, NBA, Olympics, you name it. And I've combined it with the methods that not only got me hired by Cricket Australia before graduating, but also helped me double my salary during COVID. Sports Grad has helped people land over 700 roles in sport, and this program takes the guesswork out of an industry where most people think you need to get lucky. To apply for the Sports Grad Method program, head to www.sportsgrad.com.au/program.